So today is February 11th, Saturday. 6 days from now, I'm going to be getting on a plane to head to Europe for a few weeks to go on tour with Roofman. About a year and a half ago, my friend Philip Conrad and I got to go to Hamburg, Germany and record an album for Roofman, and now that album is coming out, and so we get to go play a short run of shows in Hamburg, 2 shows in the Netherlands, and 1 show in London. And I'm incredibly excited about it. It's time to start getting ready. We've been working really hard down here getting the studio sort of up and running, but we now have to put a pin in this and start getting ready to go for this tour. And the first order of business for me is building a new pedal board. Now, over the years, I have built probably a dozen or more pedal boards, and I've learned quite a few valuable lessons. Now, I'm not a great pedal board builder by any means, but I think I'm pretty decent at putting together a good board that's going to be reliable and get me through whatever situation I find myself in. So that's what we're doing today. I'm going to show you basically how I like to build pedal boards and what I like to think about when I'm putting together a board for a specific purpose. Now, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is Sweetwater. They kindly sent out most of the supplies that I'm going to be using to build this board and get it ready. You can check the affiliate links in the description box of this video to see exactly what I'm using and get your hands on it yourself if you're interested. It's a great way to support the channel. If you enjoy what I'm doing over here, I earn a small commission through those affiliate links, and it helps us keep making these videos. So the first step to any good pedal board build I've found is a pretty solid plan. So usually for me, the first part of the planning process is looking at the gig. Where am I going? Who am I playing with? What type of sounds do I need? And how are we traveling? Well, I know where I'm going. I'm going overseas to Europe. So that means we're flying. We're going in and out of airports, in and out of vans and trailers. So the board needs to be relatively small and lightweight. Also, because we're flying internationally, that sort of changes things as well. The board is going to be going through multiple security checkpoints, which means that the way I secure the pedals to the board needs to be really, really solid. I've had issues with this in the past. So now I know where I'm going and how I'm traveling. Now, what am I playing? What kind of sounds do I need? Well, because I played on this record, I know exactly what I use, and I know exactly the type of sounds that I need to get. So with that in mind, I can actually get away with having a little bit smaller, more compact board because I don't need to cover a whole lot of ground. I found that smaller, more compact, simpler rigs are almost always the way to go. They're more affordable, generally speaking. They're going to be more reliable, and they're easier to travel with. They're easier on your back to load in and out. So your plan is important. What's the mission of this board or this whole rig? What do you need to play? What sounds do you need to be able to pull off? How are you traveling? Where are you traveling? Those things are all super important. Once you've gotten those ideas down, then it's time to start thinking about the actual board. For instance, what pedals and how many of them are you going to be using? That's going to determine the size of your board, but it's also going to determine things like your power supply. How big of a power supply do you need? It's also going to determine things like patch cables. How much patch cable do you need? How many connectors do you need to make your own patch cables? Yes, you should be soldering your own patch cables. You should not be using solderless cables. I will die on this hill. What do you need versus what do you want? What's a nice to have versus a need to have? So for example, on this gig, I know that I need a few things to play with Roofman. First off, I need this pedal, the Chase Bliss Mood. Now this is not sponsored by Chase Bliss or anything. I use this pedal all over the Roofman record, and there's some key moments on the record that utilize this specific pedal, as well as this, the Synesthesia from GFI system. Now, much like the Mood, this is not sponsored by GFI or anything like that, but I did use this all over the Roofman record. And specifically, I used a few sounds that I found from the YouTube channel Cyber Attack. I'm a huge fan of Ivan's work. He designed some sounds that I put in the Synesthesia and used all over the Roofman record. I'll have that video linked down below. You should go check it out. It's one of my favorite videos. But like the Mood, the Synesthesia is all over that Roofman record with really key guitar parts, hooks, lead lines, So both of these pedals have to go. Now the third need that I have for this rig is going to be a fuzz. For this, I'm going to use the Hephaestus from Mythos. Now this is a special edition collaboration that I did with Zach at Mythos. These will be available in a few weeks. Now if you haven't seen the Hephaestus, this is based off of a Jordan Boss Tone fuzz, I think Spirit in the Sky fuzz, but this knob is not a volume control or a fuzz control. Instead, it's a voltage control. And as you turn it down, it starts to starve the voltage going through the circuit, and you get this crazy sub-octave low harmonic thing. It's like the evil twin sister of an Octavia, for example, where an Octavia goes octave up, this goes octave down, and it sounds absolutely sinister. Okay, so now we have our basic plan together. It's time to pick a board. Now, over the years, I've done just about every type of board there is. Flat boards, pedal trains, custom built boards. But I wanted to try something a little bit different on this build, and so I went with a Temple Audio board. Now, I did this mainly out of curiosity. I've seen a lot of people start to use this system, and it's becoming more popular, and I've never used it, so this is kind of a test. Now, Temple Audio makes a traditional sort of angled board where you can put your power supply underneath it. And they've got this cool grid system on top with their own way of mounting pedals. But the real reason I wanted to try out their system was because of these modules that they designed to fit in the side of their board. So this is the Duo 17. There's two of these big module slots and one small one on each side of the board. And they make a variety of different modules that fit into these slots that do different things. It seems really interesting, and so I just wanted to try it out. Now, I don't have any affiliation with Temple Audio or anybody. This came from Sweetwater. And now that we've picked the pedal board, we need to think about our power supply. Now, for this board, I'm gonna use a Chalks power supply. I'm a big fan of Chalk stuff. I've been using them on boards for a long time, going back 7-8 years that I've, bought and paid for. Now, to make this board fit its intended role, there is one other big element that I need to add other than the 3 pedals that I talked about. And that is some kind of multi-effect modeler unit, because the reality is on top of those 3 sounds, I need some basic sort of meat and potato things. Reverbs, delays, boosts, compression. And in order to do that, but keep the board small and lightweight and simple, we have to compromise. And this gets into the next phase of the board build, which is the layout process. Now, the layout is super important because it's going to determine a lot of other factors, and there's a few things that you need to consider when you're laying your board out. So I'm going to start with the 3 must-have pedals, just get them placed on the board, and then I'm going to start to work through my options. So option 1 is the HX Stomp XL. Really powerful pedal, has all of the Line 6 effects and reverbs and delays, as well as their overdrives, fuzzes, compressions, EQs. So not only would this give me all the effect options that I need, but it would also give me the ability to use this board DI and use the amp modeling and cab modeling to basically have a direct to front of house board. So the HX Stomp is a really good option. Also, in terms of the layout, it leaves plenty of space around the pedals for routing cables, as well as being able to access the foot switches without stepping on other stuff. When your pedals are stacked super close together, it makes it really, really hard to use, especially in a live setting where you're moving around on stage. This is one of the lessons I've learned the hard ways over the years. So give yourself enough space between the pedals to access the foot switches. But there's also the Quad Cortex from Neural DSP. Now, like the HX Stomp, this gives me access to a myriad of different effects, but it also would turn this board into a really powerful direct to front of house modeler solution. Now, the thing I like about the Quad Cortex over the HX Stomp is I have the ability to model my own amps as well as model my own overdrives and boosts. Now, it doesn't do fuzzes all that well, but I could basically capture a lot of my favorite overdrives, store them in the Quad Cortex, and not have to put them on the board, which I have done in the past with this thing to great success. This makes a really great fly rig solution. It also has 2 effects loops, so I could put the Synesthesia and the Hephaestus, for example, in effects loops and control them on and off from the foot switches here and not have to worry about hitting them up here on top of the board. So this also is a really good option. However, I'm seeing a slight issue with the layout here. I can't get the Quad Cortex and the Synesthesia to fit on the board quite how I want them. They're touching, like the corners of them are touching. And while that may not seem like a big deal now, that can be a big issue down the road. So the Quad Cortex is a great option, but might not make the cut for this board. And the third option is the HX effects from Line 6. I'm a huge fan of this unit. I think it's one of the most slept on pieces of gear in the guitar world right now. It's basically every Line 6 effects from their Helix platform and platforms from the past built into one pedal. It also has their cab modeling and things like that. So it basically does everything the HX Stomp does, just without the amp modeling. And I don't need an amp modeler on this board. And like the Quad Cortex, it has two individual effects loops, so I can route the Synesthesia and the Hephaestus into this and not have to worry about stomping on them on the board. Now, one lesson I've learned over the years is when you're in this layout phase, it's best to not just try and put the pedals down, but also start to kind of wire things up, primarily with your patch cables. You'd be surprised, especially if this is your first time building a pedal board, how complicated things get when you start adding patch cables and how quickly space starts to evaporate. So in order to kind of help me decide what I'm going to take, I'm just going to loosely lay the pedals out on the board, and I'm going to start trying to patch cables in and out. And it doesn't matter if I have cables that are the right length. Right now, what I'm looking for is how the connectors fit. How close can I get the pedals together without having too much strain on the cables? Can I route cables underneath the board, or is it better to route them on top of the board? All these things are going to have a big impact on where pedals go, and for me, what sort of multi-effect device am I going to use? Okay, so obviously this is a big mess right now, but I've already started patching the inputs and the outputs. Now I know I want the Hephaestus first because it's a fuzz. So I'll plug into the side of the board, into the Hephaestus, out of the fuzz, and then into my HX Stomp. And so far that looks fine. The issue I'm running into is the effects loop. The HX Stomp only has one output for the effects loop. Now you can use that to run two different mono loops, but you need a splitter cable. You need a TRS to dual TS cable, male to female adapter. Now you can get these pretty cheap from Guitar Center or Amazon, but the problem is packaging. I don't think I'm going to be able to get that adapter cable mounted up here in a clean, reliable way. Okay, so I've spent the last hour or so down here trying different setups and patching cables together just to get an idea of what's going to work and what's not. And I've made my decision. I think it's going to be the HX Stomp. One, it's going to make this board super versatile and powerful. Having the modeler on board, even though I don't need it for this run, is going to make this board really usable and a really good option for me to grab and go in the future. Two, I think the size is really important. Having all this extra space here to be able to comfortably route cables, route power and everything is going to make this board much more reliable and usable in the future. Let's say something does happen where I lose a cable, for example. Having this much space to work with on the board means I can get to it and fix it much more easily than having a super tight, compact pedal board. Also, I can get regular length patch cables from any guitar store if I need to on the road and get this thing put back together and up and running. So yes, it doesn't have my ideal signal routing setup with two individual effects loops, but the pros outweigh the cons in this particular board setup. So with that in mind, I'm gonna go with the Stomp. Okay, so I got my power supplies mounted to the bottom of the board here. Now I took another Chalks power supply that I had. I bought this DC7 years ago, and I've used it to connect the expander here. Now the reality is this is way more power than I need for this board, but it's future-proofing this board, and it's gonna give me options if I wanna run external effects and things like that. Now I'm going a little bit out of order here because I went ahead and mounted my first pedal, the HX Stomp. Traditionally, I like to get the power supply mounted first and start running power cables where they need to go before I put pedals down in their homes. But I wanted to test out Temple's pedal mounting system. See, their whole thing is rather than using Velcro or dual lock, they want you to use these pads, these like quick release pads. So they're adhesive backed on one side. You stick that to the bottom of your pedal, and then this fits into the grid system on top of the board. So you put that down on top of the board, it locks into place, and then you put this thumb screw in from the bottom. It's a good idea, and we'll see how they hold up. My big question is the quality of this adhesive. Is it actually going to be strong enough to hold this pedal down through flights and travel and hot and cold environments? We'll see. As a backup, I am going to bring a roll of dual lock and leave it in the case. So if these plates fail, I can just zip up some dual lock, stick it to the bottom of the pedal, stick it to the board, and we're good to go. So at this point in the process, you've got your planning done, you've got your general layout done, you've mounted your power supplies. It's best, in my opinion, to start running your power cables. I like to make sure I've got enough power and that it's going to be able to go where I need it to go. After that, we'll start putting pedals down on the board in their permanent location and start making up our signal cable or our patch cables. Okay, so the board is basically powered up, ready to go. I got all the pedals attached. Most of them I am using the quick release system, these pads, with the exception of the synesthesia. The power supply is directly underneath the synesthesia, therefore I couldn't use the quick release system, so I did have to use dual lock on that one. I'm gonna grab another battery for my light here and show you what we're gonna do next. Okay, so now we're getting ready to wire the board up for signal for the patch cables. Now I'm gonna make most of the patch cables to length because there are some interesting runs and stuff that I have to do here. Now, one of the main reasons I wanted to try out this Temple Audio pedal board system was because of these mods that they call them, these modules that you can get that mount into the side of the board. And they have a few different modules that I ordered from Sweetwater that I think are gonna make this board really, really nice and user-friendly. So the first one is this one. This is called the 4X Mod Pro. And basically this is an input and output module with built-in buffers. Now the way this board's set up, I'm not currently running the 4-cable method, but it's nice to know that if I wanted to in the future, I could just add a couple cables through this underneath the board and use this with an amp that's got an effects loop. So that's pretty cool. Now the other one that I got is the DI Mod Pro. Now this is actually what I'm gonna use with this setup here. Essentially this is a stereo DI. So the 2 1/4-inch jacks on the side are pass-throughs. So I'll take the outputs of the HX Stomp left and right and go straight into the back here, left and right. And then I've got 1/4-inch jacks that can go straight to an amplifier. But then if I want to go stereo DI to front of house, for example, from the HX Stomp, if I'm using it as a direct rig, I've got the XLR outputs there ready to go. So this might actually be the most powerful pedal board I've ever built, which I actually wasn't expecting given the size and sort of shape of this thing and just the job that I was building it for, just a specific gig with a few specific sounds. But after playing it for a few hours now, this thing might actually become the main pedal board for me. Now, it didn't take very long to wire up the patch cables because I actually had all of these patch cables laying around from my main touring board that I had built a few years ago by Mason at Vertex. All these cables were just laying around, not being used, and I found a handful that actually worked. So that saved me a ton of time. Now, the thing that I'm liking about this is sort of the modularity of it. This is the configuration that I have it in now, but I could very easily switch around this top row of pedals. For example, the Poly Bebo in the top left corner I have just because I'm experimenting with it. I may or may not take it on this run, but it's super powerful. It's really interesting, but I could just as easily pull that off and swap in, you know, like my spring reverb here. This is a Endless Summer. There's an actual spring tank in here. This is a super cool pedal. It fits in that slot. Or if I wanted to get even weirder, I could do the Zoya from Empress. Or I could even take off the entire HX Stomp at the bottom and just do another row of straight ahead pedals if I want to. I have enough power run on the bottom with the 2 Chalks power supplies to cover that. And with these input and output modules on the side, I actually have a ton of flexibility. I could run a 4-cable method with an amp that has an effects loop and run my top row of effects through the effects loop and just run the fuzz through the front of the amp if I wanted to. But I have to say, so far I'm pretty impressed with the Temple Audio system. It was really easy to put together. Cable management was super easy because of the holes everywhere. Zip ties will fit just about anywhere on the board. However, I do have a couple of gripes about the Temple Audio board. A, you have to commit to this mounting bracket. And if you're like me and you're swapping pedals in and out all the time between different boards, this is kind of a pain because now this pedal won't sit flat on a desktop work surface, which is how I use this thing quite a bit. The other big issue I have is with the flex on the board and having to install this added sort of truss piece here in the middle. This is an extra cost that you have to purchase on top of the board, and this is one of their smallest boards, and it was flexing substantially enough that I felt that this was needed. So Temple Audio, I think you guys need to include this with every board purchase because the fact that the boards flex this much is kind of a design flaw in my opinion, and so this solution needs to be included. And also, I did run into a few situations where I couldn't quite get a pedal to fit with the cables based on the grid system. When I was laying everything out, I thought, for example, the mood was in the right position, but I had to use a different patch cable on this side because there wasn't enough room for the connector. And because I'm using their grid system, their quick release system, the mood can't move. Wherever it was locked in, wherever that adhesive pad was mounted to, that's it. So you kind of lose some flexibility there. And the last gripe I have is not necessarily a drawback, but it's something I'm gonna have to be aware of. And that is the fact that whenever I take this board out, I'm probably gonna need to bring a set of small screwdrivers. Reason being, the hardware that they use to mount these modules in the side are super tiny screws with very, very little thread on them. And I can see after using this board for a while and traveling with it, those screws backing out and getting loose. In fact, the whole board is held together by screws. So if you're using something like this, I'd recommend traveling with a screwdriver because more than likely you're gonna need to maintain the actual board itself. But I have to say, overall, I'm really happy with how this board came out. I may make some modifications. There's a few things I might swap out, like the Bebo, for example. I think it's just kind of overkill for this gig, but I was excited to try it out. But otherwise, this thing is dialed in. It's super powerful, really, really versatile. It's compact, it's pretty lightweight, and yeah, this board is killer, man. So like I said, if you want more information about some of the gear that I use to put this board together, everything's linked in the description box down below. Affiliate links will be marked. Huge thanks to Sweetwater once again for sponsoring today's video. They sent out the Temple Audio board, one of the Chalk's power supplies, and a few other odds and ends to help me get this thing up and running. And I'm really happy with it. And also, if you're in Hamburg, the Netherlands, or London, come out and see us. I'm playing with Roofman. I'll have the links down below in the description box. My friend Philip Conrad and I are incredibly excited to get out and play these songs that we recorded over a year ago. Once again, thanks for watching. My name is Rhett Shull. Hope to see you out on the road, and remember, there is no plan B.